Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly into the shadows of history, into a world where the most dangerous weapons weren't bullets or bombs, but paintbrushes, air pumps, and a little bit of Hollywood magic. Imagine this: a moonlit field somewhere in Europe during the height of World War II. The air is cool and damp, smelling faintly of mud and diesel. In the distance, there's no gunfire, just the soft hiss of air inflating something big, something heavy-looking, and yet light enough for two men to carry. You step closer, and your eyes adjust to the shapes swelling in the night. They look like tanks, hulking beasts of steel, except these tanks crumple like cheap party balloons if you lean on them. This is not a war you probably won't survive, unless you trip over one of the air hoses and knock yourself out. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere far from this muddy little field, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're crouching low now, eyes scanning as a team of soldiers, young, old, some looking like they should be behind a typewriter, others like they wandered off a Broadway set, haul long bundles from the back of a truck. They unroll thick rubber sheeting, the kind that smells faintly like a brand new raincoat, except this one has bolts, hatches, and turret details painted right into it. Air hoses snake across the grass, their ends clipped into valves with practiced hands. Slowly, the tanks rise, first sagging and floppy, then upright and menacing. In the moonlight, from a few hundred yards away, you'd swear they were the real deal. Mainstream history tells us these inflatable tanks were part of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, later nicknamed the Ghost Army. Their job was deception, pure and simple. Make the Germans think Allied forces were somewhere they weren't. Quirky fact? The inflatables were so realistic that some American GIs, marching past them in daylight, saluted without realizing they were greeting a giant rubber prop. Historians still argue whether the idea originated entirely from Allied planners, or if it borrowed tricks from older, pre-war British camouflage experiments. A soldier next to you leans on one of the tanks, just to show off, and his hand sinks in with a soft squeak. "Not bulletproof," he says with a grin, "but it'll sure make Jerry think twice." You can't help but chuckle. This war, at least in this corner of the field, feels more like a traveling circus than a battlefield. And maybe that's the point. You're still standing in that damp field, the silhouettes of rubber tanks looming like silent sentinels, when a low, almost imperceptible hum begins to creep across the landscape. At first, it's so soft you think it might be the wind, but then it deepens into a rhythmic rumble, tires crunching gravel, engines revving in the distance, the metallic clank of heavy machinery being hauled along a road. You instinctively glance around for headlights, but there's nothing. Just the darkness, the still grass, and a few distant trees swaying in the breeze. The sound isn't coming from real vehicles at all. Somewhere nearby, hidden under a camo tarp, is a truck loaded with enormous loudspeakers, wooden boxes the size of refrigerators, connected to amplifiers, and an operator hunched over a control board like a DJ at the world's weirdest nightclub. This is sonic warfare, and it's one of the Ghost Army's most bizarre and brilliant tools. The recordings, made by the engineers of the U.S. Army Signal Corps, were captured from actual tanks, trucks, and artillery convoys, then mixed into realistic battle playlists that could be looped for hours. Mainstream history notes that these soundscapes were recorded at Fort Knox, using the real machines to get every rattle, backfire, and gear shift just right. The quirky bit? Some soldiers reportedly added small mistakes into the audio, like an out-of-place horn honk or the clatter of a dropped wrench, because perfect repetition would tip off a keen-eared enemy. Historians still argue whether the Germans ever fully believed these sound tricks on their own, or if they only worked when combined with the visual spectacle of inflatable armies. You watch the operator now, flicking switches and adjusting volume as the convoy draws closer. In your mind's eye, you can see it, a column of tanks rolling through the night, the smell of exhaust heavy in the air, the ground trembling under their treads. You almost believe it yourself. A few soldiers lounging nearby have grown used to the deception's eerie soundtrack. One is lying on his back, staring at the stars, casually tossing a helmet up and catching it. Another is carving a face into a piece of scrap wood, his knife flicking under the faint glow of a shielded lantern. It's war. Yes, but tonight, they're playing a role, and the front line is miles away, if it even exists in this particular corner. The speakers rotate slightly, sending the convoy noise sweeping across the fields like a ghost road. From a distance, the effect is uncanny. You can imagine a German scout pausing in the shadows, hearing this rolling thunder and scrambling back to report an entire division moving toward them. Somewhere far away, a nervous commander might be redrawing his maps right now, trying to guess where this army will strike. One of the sound engineers, an older man with round glasses and a cigarette clinging to his lip, leans toward you. "It's not just the tanks," he murmurs. "We've got fake bridge-building noises, artillery setups, even guys shouting orders. Want to hear the one where it sounds like they're unloading a train? That's a crowd favorite." You can't help but smile. The Ghost Army isn't just fighting with weapons. They're fighting with theater, sound, and imagination. And in the moonlit quiet, it's working. The night fades into a dim, pewter-colored dawn, and the dew clings stubbornly to your boots as you trudge across a field that, at first glance, looks like the real staging ground for an armored division. Rows of tanks sit ready, artillery barrels jut toward the horizon, and the smell of oil and machine grease hangs faintly in the cool morning air. But then your eyes catch a few oddities. One tank is sitting at an angle that would make a real driver nervous. A half-track seems to have sunk into the mud, except the mud is just painted canvas. And over near the tree line, two men in olive drab are painting bricks onto a sheet of plywood. You've stumbled into the domain of the Ghost Army's camouflage artists, painters, sculptors, set designers, and stagehands recruited straight from art schools and Broadway productions. Their task is to create the illusions that fill in the gaps between the inflatable vehicles and the booming soundtrack. This isn't just hiding equipment under netting. This is building an entire visual lie from scratch. Mainstream history says many of these men came from the art departments of big-name advertising firms and universities. They were trained not only in military camouflage, but also in theatrical set construction, learning how to make plywood look like steel, burlap like concrete, and a stretch of empty grass like a supply depot. Quirky fact? One soldier, who'd been a sculptor in civilian life, once made a fake anti-aircraft gun out of drain pipes and chicken wire so convincing that Allied pilots radioed in sightings of new German defenses. Historians still argue whether these visual tricks were more effective from the air or from the ground, especially given that reconnaissance photos could be studied for hours. The scene around you feels strangely festive for wartime. A lanky private with a pencil behind his ear stands on a ladder, painting rust streaks down the side of an inflatable tank so it looks like it's seen action. Another is on his knees in the dirt, spreading gravel around a fake motor pool so that tire tracks appear to lead right into it. The smell of wet paint drifts on the breeze, mixing with the faint, steady hiss of an air pump inflating yet another decoy vehicle. One of the sergeants, a barrel-chested man with paint splatters on his sleeves, steps back from his handiwork and squints. "Needs a shadow," he mutters, then dips his brush in dark gray and adds a strip of paint on the ground beside a fake truck from a few hundred feet away. The illusion will be perfect, real enough to fool binoculars and the human brain's hunger for patterns. Nearby, a pile of props awaits deployment. Oil drums, actually painted cardboard. Crates marked with bold black stencils. Ammunition, handle with care, that are as light as a shoebox. And even fake laundry lines strung with uniforms, because nothing says active military camp like socks flapping in the breeze. You realize that this war zone is, in many ways, a giant stage. And these men are its backstage crew. You crouch beside a soldier kneeling in the grass, carefully positioning a wooden crate. "Don't want it too neat," he explains with a grin. "Real camps are messy. If it looks too perfect, they'll smell a rat." You nod, impressed. Every detail matters, every brush stroke, every scuff mark, every fake shadow. And here, in the early morning light, the Ghost Army's magic is starting to take shape. The sun is climbing higher now, burning away the mist and revealing a narrow country road cutting through the rolling French countryside. You find yourself walking alongside a convoy, except this one is more smoke and mirrors than steel and armor. A flatbed truck rumbles past, its cargo covered in a tarp that shifts just enough for you to glimpse the rounded, olive-green flank of what looks like a jeep. A few more vehicles pass, each carrying similar equipment, all bound for some undisclosed location. But you know the truth. These are not real military workhorses at all. They're rubber, inflatable, props. The Ghost Army has decided to stage a show along the road. One meant to be seen from the air, from a distance, or by any unlucky scout who might stumble close enough to get a peek. A pair of soldiers stand at the roadside, pretending to inspect a tire while actually fastening a hollow, collapsible artillery piece into position. From this angle, the whole convoy looks like a serious military movement, enough to make any German commander sit up straight and wonder why he hadn't heard about it sooner. Mainstream history points out that these road shows were used to make it appear as though divisions were moving rapidly across the countryside, ready to reinforce one front or open another. The quirky fact here? Some soldiers would go as far as to wear dirty uniforms from entirely different units, just in case they were spotted up close, to sell the illusion that they were fresh arrivals from elsewhere. Historians still argue whether the Germans ever sent reconnaissance teams to directly investigate these fake convoys, or if they relied solely on aerial spotting and intercepted radio chatter. You notice that the movement is carefully choreographed. The tanks and artillery ride atop trucks in staggered intervals, while a few smaller vehicles dart ahead to set up the next staging point. Every so often, the convoy halts, not because of breakdowns, but to give the inflatable gear time to be unloaded, arranged, and photographed from above. Somewhere in the skies, an Allied reconnaissance plane circles, snapping photos that will later be slipped into channels the Germans are sure to intercept. One soldier, a wiry man with sunburned cheeks, taps the side of a fake jeep and laughs. "Looks better than the one I drove back home," he says. You lean closer and realize the windshield is just a painted sheet of fabric. The steering wheel nothing more than a wooden ring tied in place. Further ahead, the convoy passes a small village. Locals peek out from their windows, puzzled, perhaps reassured by the sight of reinforcements. The Ghost Army soldiers wave, smiling like celebrities on a parade route. They're playing to multiple audiences, enemy eyes, friendly spirits, and sometimes just their own amusement. By the time the last truck rolls past, the road is littered with dusty footprints, tire tracks, and the faint smell of diesel. It looks, for all the world, like a real army just passed through, and somewhere, miles away, in an office thick with cigarette smoke and the rustle of maps. An enemy officer is drawing entirely the wrong conclusion. The afternoon light has turned golden, stretching long shadows across the grass as you make your way toward a squat, nondescript tent pitched on the edge of the camp. At first, it looks like any other field communications post, wires trailing out in all directions, a couple of folding chairs, and a canvas flap stirring lazily in the breeze. But inside, the air hums with static and the quiet. Deliberate voices of men pretending to be other men. You've stepped into the domain of the Ghost Army's radio tricksters. These are the voices that never stop. The phantom conversations that travel over the airwaves to anyone listening, especially the Germans. On a folding table in the center of the tent sits a bank of radio transmitters, their dials glowing softly. A soldier with headphones scribbles in a notebook, while another reads a carefully scripted log into a microphone. They're not talking about the weather. They're discussing troop movements, supply delays, ammunition shortages, every mundane detail an eavesdropper might expect from a real army on the move. Mainstream history tells us that these radio operators were trained to mimic the exact handwriting of Morse code used by specific Allied units. Every operator had a unique rhythm, a fingerprint of dots and dashes, and the tricksters learned to imitate them perfectly. Quirky fact? They even staged mistakes and corrections mid-message, because no real operator sent flawless transmissions for days on end. Historians still argue whether German intelligence fully swallowed these transmissions, or simply added them to the growing pile of conflicting information they were being fed. You lean over a soldier's shoulder as he keys in a message, his fingers dancing over the transmitter in a steady, practiced rhythm. The tone in his eyes is deadly serious. There's no joking here. Every message must sound authentic enough to convince an unseen listener that they're intercepting genuine orders. Even the pauses are timed to feel natural, as though the operator is waiting for a reply that will never come, outside. Another operator lounges against a crate, puffing on a cigarette between shifts. "We're basically actors," he says with a shrug. "Only our stage is invisible, and our audience is sitting in Berlin." He flicks ash onto the dirt and grins. Best part is, they can't boo. Through the canvas walls, you can still hear the faint click and buzz of transmissions. Somewhere far away, a German signals officer might be leaning over his own radio, brow furrowed, trying to make sense of this chatter. Combined with the inflatable tanks, the fake convoys, and the carefully staged photographs, these phantom messages weave another thread in the Ghost Army's elaborate web. You step back out into the sunlight, the murmur of false orders fading behind you, and realize something. The Ghost Army isn't just faking what the enemy sees. They're faking what the enemy hears, what they read, and even what they think. And in a war where information can move faster than bullets, that may be the most dangerous weapon of all. The day's light is softening into that fragile, amber glow just before dusk, when the air is still but the shadows begin to lengthen. You've drifted toward the far edge of the Ghost Army's staging area, where the fields dip into a shallow valley. It's quieter here, too quiet, until the first low growl rolls over the hills like distant thunder. You freeze, instinctively scanning the sky. The sound deepens, becoming the distinct mechanical snarl of aircraft engines. Someone shouts, "Luftwaffe!" and the camp snaps to life. Men dive for cover, ducking behind sandbags, under trucks, even behind the bulging sides of inflatable tanks. You hunch down, the grass brushing your cheek, heart thudding in time with the approaching drone. This time, the danger isn't make-believe. Real German bombers are sweeping in for an attack. And the strange irony? They're coming for a target that doesn't exist. From above, the Ghost Army's meticulously crafted stage. Tanks, artillery, supply depots, looks like the perfect strike point. The deception has worked almost too well. Mainstream history records that the Ghost Army's illusions sometimes invited genuine danger. Enemy pilots, convinced they were about to cripple a key Allied position, would waste fuel and ammunition bombing fields full of nothing but rubber, wood, and painted cloth. Quirky fact? On at least one occasion, an inflatable tank was hit dead on, collapsing into a sad heap of canvas, and the men nearby reportedly laughed so hard they could barely re-inflate it afterward. Historians still argue whether such attacks truly helped by drawing fire away from real units, or if they were simply an unavoidable risk of selling the illusion. The first bombs fall, their whistle slicing through the air before the earth jumps beneath you. A plume of dirt erupts near a row of fake trucks, showering them in mud, but leaving them otherwise unharmed. Another blast tears into a patch of empty grass, kicking up a crater big enough to swallow a Jeep whole. You can almost feel the Luftwaffe pilots' confusion as they circle back, expecting fire, secondary explosions, chaos, and instead seeing nothing but a few soldiers sprinting for new hiding spots. A sergeant crouched beside you mutters, "Let 'em waste it. Every shell here is one less for the boys up front." He wipes a bead of sweat from his brow and peers toward the horizon. You both watch as the bombers finally peel away, their dark silhouettes melting into the orange haze of the setting sun. Slowly, the camp reemerges from its hiding places. Men brush dust from their uniforms, share shaky laughs, and inspect the damage. The fake tanks stand proud. Well, most of them. One lies half deflated, slumped on its side like it's just had a long day. Someone pats it affectionately, promising to get her patched up before breakfast. You stand there for a moment, letting the adrenaline ebb, realizing just how thin the line is between the Ghost Army's playful illusions and the brutal reality they're trying to divert. Tonight, the trick saved real lives. Tomorrow? That's anyone's guess. The next morning, the sky over northern France is a muted wash of gray, heavy with low clouds. You're standing on a bluff that overlooks a patchwork of hedgerows and winding lanes, the kind of landscape that could hide an entire army, or a very convincing imitation of one. Below you, the Ghost Army is gearing up for one of its boldest acts, the Phantom Division in Normandy. It's weeks after D-Day, and the real Allied forces are pushing inland. But here, far from the fiercest fighting, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops are staging an elaborate diversion. The mission is simple in concept, but dizzying in detail. Convince the Germans that a major force is massing for a strike in an entirely different sector, pulling their attention and their troops away from the real battles. From your vantage point, you watch soldiers wrestle with rolls of camouflage netting, draping it over inflatable tanks that now stand in neat, aggressive rows. Others set up fake artillery positions complete with painted logs masquerading as cannon barrels. The road leading to the bluff is lined with carefully positioned supply trucks, their canvas sides fluttering just enough to look real from the air. Mainstream history tells us that in Normandy, the Ghost Army's deceptions were sometimes coordinated with genuine small unit movements, so that German scouts might see both real and fake activity and assume the scale was much larger. Quirky fact? Some of the camouflage artists even weathered the inflatables, adding fake mud splatters and chipped paint to make them seem battle-worn. Historians still argue whether the Germans ever truly believed a major attack was coming here, but they certainly repositioned some units just in case. Down the slope, a group of radio tricksters begin their work, transmitting phony orders about artillery placement and troop readiness. Somewhere else in the setup, loudspeakers rumble with the sounds of convoys arriving. The illusion is layered, each piece reinforcing the others, until the valley feels alive with military purpose. You're drawn to a scene at the far end of the bluff where two soldiers in grease-stained coveralls are tinkering with a generator. One leans over and says, "This isn't just for show. It powers the lights tonight. The Germans think they've got sharp eyes, So we give them something worth seeing. As the day wears on, the fake camp settles into a believable rhythm. Smoke curls from dummy cooking fires, laundry flaps lazily on a line, and patrols walk the perimeter, rifles slung casually. From above, or even from a distant hillside, it's the portrait of a division readying for battle. When night falls, the lights flicker on, casting golden pools that spill over the silhouettes of tanks and trucks. You stand there in the dark, feeling the damp breeze on your face, imagining German binoculars trained on this very spot. They'd see everything. The shapes, the movement, the glow. What they wouldn't see is that the closest thing to a real weapon here is a toolbox full of wrenches and spare valves. The morning breaks bright and sharp. The kind of crisp light that makes every detail pop. Exactly the sort of challenge the Ghost Army's more theatrical minds relish. You find yourself in a section of camp that looks less like a military base and more like a film studio that's spilled onto the French countryside. Men in uniform bustle around not with rifles, but with sewing kits, rolls of fabric, tins of paint, and toolboxes stuffed with brushes and rivets. This is where Hollywood has come to war. Some of the soldiers here were costume designers, prop masters, and set decorators in another life. Craftsmen from Broadway stages and Hollywood backlots who once dressed actors as kings and cowboys, and now dress ordinary GIs as an army that doesn't exist. A lanky private is at a workbench, distressing a freshly sewn jacket to look as though it's been dragged through 3 campaigns. "Too clean and they won't buy it," he mutters, rubbing it with a mix of dirt and motor oil. Across from him, another soldier is painting a bold insignia onto the side of a truck, an insignia that belongs to a completely different unit, one stationed hundreds of miles away. Mainstream history notes that these men were part of the unit's special effects team, responsible for making everything from fake rank insignia to counterfeit vehicle markings. Quirky fact? They even forged entire stacks of phony paperwork, so that if a German spy ever rifled through the wrong desk, they'd find orders from the highest levels authorizing non-existent troop movements. Historians still argue whether these visual props were the most crucial element of the deception or just the cherry on top of the sonic and radio illusions. You wander toward a line of mannequins dressed in full combat gear, posed around a table as if deep in discussion. One has a cigar clamped between painted lips. Another leans on a map with a hand forever frozen mid-gesture. From a distance, or a quick glance through binoculars, they're just more officers planning the day's operations. A corporal with a tape measure draped around his neck catches your eye and grins. "Wardrobe's everything," he says. "You can have the best fake tank in the world, but if the guy next to it looks wrong, the whole thing falls apart." He goes back to fitting a soldier with a jacket one size too big, so it hangs in a way that suggests he's been issued standard gear in a hurry. Nearby, a pair of men are hammering together a wooden frame, stretching canvas over it to create the outline of a command tent. Once painted and weathered, it will look like a bustling headquarters, complete with fake sentries and strategically placed equipment crates. By midday, the area hums with activity. Stitches, hammer blows, brush strokes. You realize that this, too, is a battlefront. Only here, the weapons are fabric and pigment, the ammunition is imagination, and victory is measured in how convincingly you can make an enemy believe in something that isn't there. You've begun to realize that Churchill's silk pajamas are more than just a bedtime indulgence. They're a personal fortress, as you imagine the Prime Minister in his bed at 10 Downing Street, the air outside still trembling with the distant thump of bombs. You picture him cocooned in fabric so smooth it slides like water over his skin. The pajama top is buttoned all the way up, collar neat, while the matching trousers are loose enough to allow him to shift easily between dozing and leaping up to deal with matters of state. It's almost absurd. a war leader who refuses to be caught off guard, whether by enemy aircraft or a midnight telegram, without being properly attired. In his mind, silk offered more than softness. It offered preparedness. The natural sheen made him feel sharper, more alert, even while half asleep. And unlike flannel, silk didn't cling. Important if one needed to throw on a dressing gown and rush to a secure room without looking disheveled. You can picture the lamp on his nightstand casting a buttery light over the folds of that fabric, turning them into miniature hills and valleys. Each ripple seems to hum with quiet defiance, a statement that comfort and dignity can and must survive even the Luftwaffe's nightly visits. And so, as the city braced itself for another round of sirens, Churchill would slip between the sheets, the silk whispering against his skin, and trust in this strange, private armor to see him through till morning. You wake to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, measured, unhurried, the sound of someone who knows they own every second of their morning. Churchill is up, not in uniform but still in those pale silk pajamas, now topped with a thick, navy dressing gown that billows as he moves. A cigar already burns between his fingers, sending a ribbon of smoke curling into the cold air. It's not breakfast yet. Not really. Instead, this is what he calls working from bed, though in truth, the bed has been abandoned for the large leather chair by the window. On a small table beside him, tea, a stack of dispatches from the war cabinet, and the latest casualty reports from the Blitz. His eyes scan each page slowly, lips pursed, sometimes pausing to jot a note in his bold, impatient handwriting. Outside, London limps into another day of ration lines and repair crews. Somewhere in the city, bakers are kneading dough with flour scraped from the bottom of barrels. Somewhere else, a boy is sweeping glass from his bedroom floor. Churchill, aware of it all, chooses not to rush. He believes pace is power. If he hurries, the enemy wins twice. One of his secretaries enters with coded telegrams from Washington. He breaks into a half-smile, reading Roosevelt's latest, then waves the young man closer to dictate a reply. The words come in a measured growl, equal parts statesmanship and theater, the sort of message meant to reassure allies and quietly unsettle enemies. Historians still argue whether this ritualized calm truly influenced Britain's morale, or whether it was merely Churchill's personal quirk. But as you watch the man in silk calmly plot a nation's survival, the line between comfort and command seems to blur entirely. You don't realize how much time has passed until the coal fire in the grate has sunk into a bed of glowing embers. Churchill hasn't left his chair. He's only shifted occasionally, the silk of his pajamas whispering beneath the heavy navy gown with each movement. He's still dictating letters, some destined for generals in the field, others for ministers buried in paperwork miles away. Every so often, he pauses mid-sentence, tapping the ash of his cigar into a small glass tray, as though weighing whether his next word should be a hammer or a scalpel. Aides drift in and out with the quiet discipline of stagehands. One brings a fresh pot of tea, another swaps out telegram piles. A third places a map on his lap that's dotted with pins like a patient with measles. You notice how Churchill traces each front with the tip of his cigar, as if burning the locations into his memory. He asks for the latest weather reports over the channel. Clear skies, which could mean good news for supply convoys, or bad news if the Luftwaffe takes advantage. In the background, the muted hum of London's recovery plays on. Hammer strikes on scaffolding, the groan of trucks hauling debris, a muffled cheer from someone who's found their cat alive in the rubble. Churchill absorbs these sounds like a man tuning an instrument. He doesn't flinch, doesn't rush. That's the thing. You realize this entire performance is deliberate. The unhurried mornings, the silk pajamas, the steady hand with a pen. He is crafting an image of a Britain that will not break, even if its windows shatter nightly. Historians still debate whether this calm was genuine confidence or a mask for exhaustion. But here, in this quiet war room in silk, you see how a leader can fight a battle without ever standing up. You imagine the moment the decoders back in London receive the intercepted message, an innocuous string of letters and numbers that, when properly unscrambled, will dictate where convoys sail or where bombs might fall. Somewhere in a cramped, overheated office, a clerk straightens their back, leans closer to a page, and begins scribbling furiously. Your own role here, in the chill of the garden night, is to keep the link alive, your invisible, silent thread that ties this hidden villa in the countryside to the heart of the Allied war effort. Inside, the operators work in shifts, sipping strong tea that tastes faintly of metal from the chipped enamel mugs. One is yawning wide enough to pop an eardrum, another is rubbing eyes red from the radio's soft, constant glow. And yet, for all their exhaustion, there's a kind of intoxication in their focus, like gamblers around a table, holding a winning hand but unable to show it just yet. The garden air smells of wet grass and warm dust. Somewhere in the dark, a hedgehog shuffles past your boots. You think about the strange intimacy of this operation. You've never met the agents whose words you catch in the ether, and they've never met you. Yet you share an unspoken trust, knowing that even the smallest slip, a missed letter, a moment's interference, could alter the course of a battle hundreds of miles away. And there's that hum again, not just from the generator, but from the knowledge that you are part of something invisible yet massive. Not a soldier firing a rifle, not a pilot diving into danger, but a quiet presence on the edges, where the war's shadow stretches long, a presence that might never be named in official reports, yet still shifts the balance. You might think by now you've seen every odd corner of Churchill's day, but the afternoon has a peculiar rhythm that's all its own. The silk pajamas are back in their drawer, neatly folded by a valet who somehow manages to make the act look like a ceremonial rite. And Churchill has returned to his desk in his study. The fire is lit again, though the air outside is warmer now, and the windows are cracked just enough for the smell of London to drift in. Coal smoke, damp brick, and a faint tang of ozone from distant anti-aircraft fire drills. You stand by the wall, watching him work, the scratch of his fountain pen moving across thick, cream-colored stationery. The nap has changed him. His face, still lined, carries a certain glow, the post-slumber sharpness that makes you wonder whether you might be better off taking a page from his playbook. His sentences come fast, dense with metaphors and barbed wit. One letter is to Roosevelt, another to a military commander in Cairo, and a third to his wife, Clementine. All three are written in the same forceful, looping hand. He dictates some notes to his secretary, and the words come out like he's firing a machine gun, short bursts, then a pause to reload his thoughts. You can't help but marvel that this man, who seemed moments ago like a sleepy grandfather in silk, now moves through his duties with the unyielding confidence of a general on horseback. Around him, the war machine hums quietly. The telephone rings in a staccato pattern, answered by aides who pass along slips of paper with coded summaries. A radio murmurs in the background, tuned low to avoid distraction. Somewhere in the depths of the building, a teletype machine clacks and dings, spitting out updates from across the empire. It's a constant drip of the world's troubles into this single room, yet Churchill absorbs it without losing his footing. His nap has fortified him in ways coffee never could. You step closer to the map table, where pins mark every theater of the war. Red, blue, and green flags stab into paper, each a small drama unfolding thousands of miles away. North Africa looks precarious, The Mediterranean is littered with hazards. And in the Channel, a thin line of pins shows the fragile cord between Britain and the continent. Churchill glances at the map now and then. But he doesn't linger. The real battles, at least for this hour, are waged in words. An aide arrives with a small silver tray. Tea, biscuits, and a single, neat cigar resting in a porcelain dish. Churchill doesn't immediately reach for the cigar, an act of restraint so rare you suspect it's deliberate. Instead, he lifts the teacup, inhales the steam, and takes a slow sip. His eyes half close, and for a brief moment, you can see the man almost slip back into the gentle haze of the nap. But then he sets the cup down, his fingers already reaching for a pencil to scrawl a correction in the margin of a speech draft. That speech, you realize, will likely be heard by millions. It's one of those addresses that will move across the airwaves, finding its way into kitchens, factories, and trenches. As you watch him polish each sentence, you understand how his afternoon rest serves not just his body, but the nation. Without that sharpness, that clarity of mind, the words might lack their bite, their rallying cry. The nap isn't indulgence, it's strategy. Outside, the daylight begins to slant, casting long golden beams across the room. Dust motes drift lazily in the light, the only slow-moving things in this whirlwind of activity. You think of the world beyond these walls, the streets where people go about their business, ration books in hand, keeping one wary ear tuned for sirens. And you realize that Churchill's rhythm, from silk-clad slumber to steel-eyed command, mirrors the nation's own. A cycle of pause and push, of gathering strength before the next blow. At some point, the radio's volume rises slightly. A BBC announcer's voice cuts through the air, listing the day's developments. Churchill listens without breaking his writing pace, occasionally muttering, "Yes, quite," or under his breath. The news is mixed, victories in some corners, losses in others, but there's no visible shift in his demeanor. His calm is practiced, a shield for those around him. When the announcer's voice fades and the static hums, Churchill finally reaches for the cigar. He lights it with the same silver lighter you saw that morning, the flame briefly illuminating his face. The smoke curls upward, slow and blue in the fading light. It's a scene you know you'll remember. The Prime Minister, back from his nap, wrapped in the quiet fire of purpose, preparing for the night's challenges. And then, as if on cue, the door opens and a messenger enters with a folder marked "Urgent." The air in the room shifts. Churchill sets his pen down, takes the folder, and begins reading. His lips tighten, and the hand holding the cigar stills. You lean forward, trying to catch a glimpse of the text. But all you see are lines of type and official stamps. When he finishes, he closes the folder, looks at his aides, and says, "We'll handle it, but first, dinner. That's the part that catches you off guard." Dinner? Now? But as you think about it, it makes perfect sense. The war will wait for no one, but neither will the body's need for fuel. And perhaps, like the nap, the meal is part of the same logic. Restore, refocus, return to the fight. As he rises from his chair, the silk pajamas still tucked away upstairs, you understand that you've just witnessed one of the strangest balancing acts in history. A man who can spend an hour in quiet slumber, wrapped in softness, and then stride into the world's storm without hesitation. You follow him toward the dining room, ready for whatever the evening will bring. You wake the next day with the taste of metal in your mouth, a strange, cold tang that seems to be part dream residue and part the lingering scent of smoke from the night before. The silk pajamas still cling to your skin, warm now from your own body heat. but carrying the faint whisper of perfume from some past encounter. The room is bright with pale London sun, the kind that slips between curtains like an uninvited guest. Somewhere beyond the window, you hear the distant pop of anti-aircraft guns, each report muffled by distance but sharp enough to remind you of the truth. The war has no days off, not even for prime ministers or their midnight naps. You slide from the bed and move toward the heavy oak desk, its surface littered with briefing papers, hand-drawn maps, and a single glass still half-filled with scotch. There's a low hum of conversation outside the door, the sound of aides and typists already at work, feeding the endless appetite of wartime bureaucracy. You picture Churchill in this same room, moments after waking, rolling the events of the day in his head like a gambler shuffling chips. His pajama-clad silhouette would pace in short, decisive strides, cigar in hand, eyes narrowing whenever a new idea or suspicion took root. He would bark orders for tea, dictate a letter to Roosevelt, and then, without breaking the rhythm, decide the fate of a convoy bound for the Arctic Circle. The silk pajamas, soft and fluid, are an odd uniform for such a setting, yet here they stand as a quiet assertion of dominance. The enemy may darken the skies, may rattle the windows, but he will not dictate how a leader dresses in his own house. They are also a kind of armor, paradoxically delicate yet psychologically impenetrable. Every thread carries the unspoken message: I am unshaken. I rest when I choose. I rise when I am ready. Outside, the day grows busier. The air raid sirens have gone silent for now, replaced by the rhythmic clatter of typewriters and the occasional ringing of the telephone. The war rooms beneath the streets are a hive of concentrated purpose. But up here, in this sunlit pocket, there is space for strategy to breathe. Churchill's mind is sharpest in these moments, when sleep has smoothed the rough edges of fatigue. His private secretary might step in to deliver a coded telegram from Cairo. A general might arrive unannounced to brief him on a planned bombing run over the Ruhr. And yet, he does not rush to change. The pajamas remain, a silent witness to the idea that leadership is not only about command, it is about setting the tone. The silk whispers across the floorboards as he moves, and the scent of fresh ink and burning tobacco begins to fill the room. Plans are drawn, arguments weighed, alliances reinforced, all in a garment better suited for a drawing room than a war council. You find yourself strangely moved by it all. In this small, sun-washed space, the line between vulnerability and power is blurred. The pajamas are not a retreat from the war, but a calculated stance within it. And as you watch him lean over the desk, marking a position on a map with a thick black pen, you realize that history is not always forged in the roar of battle. Sometimes, it is sewn quietly, one silk thread at a time, in the stillness after a nap. You're sitting in the war room again, though the war room has shifted in tone. Less urgent, more like the lingering heartbeat after a sprint. The maps are still there, with their small, neat flags, but the air is clearer now, free of the constant cigarette haze. Churchill is leaning against the long table, not pacing for once, his silk pajamas replaced by a well-tailored pinstripe suit. He looks older than he did a few months ago, the lines around his eyes etched deeper, but the eyes themselves burn no less bright. The Blitz, as Londoners have come to call it, is winding down. The Luftwaffe's raids are less frequent now, more desperate than strategic. You can hear the difference. The sirens still wail sometimes, but there are longer pauses between them. And when the bombers do come, they fly fewer in number, their engines a softer, more scattered growl. You've grown so used to the sounds of war that the absence feels almost unnatural. Silence has become the strange new visitor. Churchill speaks without looking at you, as though addressing the map itself. They thought they could break us by breaking our nights. His hand rests on the table, fingers tapping softly. But we learned to make the nights ours. His gaze shifts toward you now, and there's a small, knowing smile. That's the thing about endurance. It's often a quieter victory than people imagine. You think back to those long evenings in his private quarters, his naps in the silk pajamas, the carefully rationed whiskey, the odd mix of tenderness and steely command in his late-night conversations. In some ways, those moments told you more about the man than the speeches ever could. The speeches were for the world. The silken hours in the middle of the night were for survival. Outside, London carries on. The city wears its scars proudly. Brick dust still clings to some windowsills. Buildings stand half dismantled by enemy bombs. Yet cafes open their doors. Children chase one another down cracked pavements, and the buses keep trundling along. There's a sense of collective exhale, but also of bracing for what's next, because the war is far from over, even if the nightly bombardment is fading. That night, as you walk back toward your quarters, you notice the moon shining over the Thames, silver light rippling in the water. No searchlights cut across it. No dull, distant thud shakes the earth. It's just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like it might hold a new beginning. You wonder if Churchill is sleeping through it or if he's up, looking out his window, savoring the stillness before the next chapter begins. The hour is late, and the map room smells faintly of candle wax and damp paper, the air heavy with the ghost of a day's long planning. You're alone. The great tables spread with the cartographic veins of Europe, the thin red and blue lines tracing the slow creep of war. Somewhere in the building, a clock ticks, each second a soft reminder that night is not truly quiet, merely a thinner kind of noise. Your silk pajamas feel cool against your skin as you lean over the map, your finger tracing the line of the front near Caen. Outside, the rain has stopped, leaving the city wet and glistening under the moon. Every so often, a blackout warden's whistle pierces the stillness, a note of stern insistence that no chink of light betray the city's position. On the far side of the room, the heavy curtains breathe in and out with the wind from a cracked window. It's an oddly comforting sound, like a giant drawing breath. You know you should sleep. Tomorrow will bring another day of decisions measured in lives, but the strange stillness of this hour feels like stolen time, a pocket of existence outside the demands of war. You think about the day's events, the coded messages sent, the long conversations in the underground war rooms, the way a single phrase from a commander can shift the fate of thousands. You think about how much of war is fought in rooms like this, not with bullets and tanks, but with maps, pens, and quiet resolve. In the distance, faintly, comes the sound of church bells tolling the late hour. Somewhere, you imagine, someone else is lying awake, listening too, another soul caught between exhaustion and the pull of wakeful thought. The city, battered yet unbowed, feels alive in its own hushed way, each darkened window hiding a story. You fold the map with deliberate care, as though the front lines might shift if you were too rough. The silence deepens, becoming almost tangible. You blow out the last candle, plunging the room into velvet black, and make your way back to bed by memory alone. Sliding under the covers, you let the day's images dissolve, the war receding to a distant hum. All that remains is the sound of your own breath, slow and steady, carrying you toward the deep, dreamless sleep that silk pajamas, late hours, and quiet victories have earned you. Good night, and may you rest as if the world has paused just for you, wrapped in calm, until morning calls you gently back.